Coming to you from the Hudson Media Group studios, this is Talking Politics, and I am the professor, Fernando Uribe. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Here's what I'm thinking about right now. Now, folks, as many of you obviously are watching this, we're all under some sort of self-quarantine due to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. And I'm sure that many of you are taking advantage of the time at home, whether you're catching up on work, spending time with family, or doing whatever it is you're doing. For example, maybe one of the things that perhaps you're considering, like I just did this past weekend, was open my census questionnaire. And sure enough, obviously, we all know that we are able to either fill out the questionnaire and mail it back, or we can fill it out online. So obviously over the weekend, while I had to take a break from binge watching Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus respectively, I said, you know what, let me be a good citizen and let me go and fill out the questionnaire. Obviously, it's required by law, and certainly it does wonders to help our communities and certainly our country in trying to sort of really get a better perspective about our demographics and sort of like the makeup of our communities collectively. And as I was filling it out, obviously, you start off with the sort of basic information. And one of the things I was very pleased about was the idea that when I got to the sex part of the questionnaire, I only saw two sexes, right? And at that point, the first thing that came to mind for me was like, wow, somebody at the Census Bureau passed high school biology like I did. Now, listen, to be very fair, the natural sciences were never my strong suit during my academic career. I was always a better social science person, a better writer, better English, history, things of, subjects like that. But when it came to the natural sciences, I struggled sometimes with chemistry, at times with physics, probably like the lowest grades I ever got in high school science courses. They were relatively always B's or B pluses. But I made sure to get A's in my biology courses. And I knew that at some point in time in my life, passing high school biology would serve me well. And when I saw the idea of someone else at the Census Bureau also passing biology, that brought a smile to my face. Because I'll be very honest with you folks, when I clicked on that tab, I was fully expecting like 30 selections. And we all know, and I've talked about it on this program before, about how sort of like social engineering and identity politics has become sort of embedded in our daily interactions, and really it's been ingrained in our political culture, in our climate, of course. But one of the things that kind of drives me crazy, and this is something that, and first and foremost, I've said this repeatedly on this program and also on my podcasts, that folks, I'm a staunch supporter of the LGBT community. Okay, I'm someone that is not trying to minimize anyone in the LGBT community. I always try to be very supportive and very understanding. And by that, having guests on my shows repeatedly to talk about the issues that really are sort of permeating in our political climate. But one of the things that I can never really wrap my head around when it comes to sort of, science, because folks, don't we always hear, especially in our political discourse, and I hear it all the time, let's say on my social media, from people that say, well, Fernando, we don't like when you use the word climate hysteria to sort of describe a lot of members of the Democratic Party and some liberals. Now, again, let me be very fair also and very transparent. I don't paint all liberals with a broad brush, just like I don't paint all conservatives with a broad brush. But one of the things that sort of drives me crazy, especially with many of my liberal friends in academia specifically, is the idea that whenever they read my social media, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Instagram, or they're stalking my Facebook, they'll on occasion see some comments of mine concerning climate change, right? I mean, 10 years ago it was global warming. Today it's climate change. Who knows? In 10 years from now, it might be climate variety. I don't know. It just seems like there's always like a new catchphrase for the next sort of big social, issue or political issue. So one of the things that I find very humorous about my colleagues is whenever they read some of my content, they'll say, well, Fernando, you're sort of the fact that you're trying to call us all climate hysterics, or you're denouncing science or trying to debunk science. I'm not trying to do that per se. Folks, I understand that, climate change and temperatures around the planet are to be taken seriously and are to be addressed. Oftentimes I feel that it is indeed climate hysteria. And oftentimes I think, especially on the left, we're seeing a lot of hyperbole and a lot of sort of bombastic rhetoric. But again, I'm not trying to sort of denounce science. I'm just simply saying that I'm not subscribing to a lot of the insanity that seems to be perpetuated by the left. But it's interesting when I get lectured by my colleagues or anyone really on social media that says, well, Fernando, you don't believe in science. You know what? The fact that you're trying to come up with arguments is just showing me that you don't believe in science whatsoever. Well, you know what, folks? When it comes to this sort of thing and it comes to sort of social engineering by the left and identity politics by the left, here's a newsflash. Clearly, you don't believe in science either. So the idea that it's sort of thrown at me, I'm going to have to throw it right back at you folks. Okay, because again, I passed high school biology, as I'm sure many of you did too. And here's the truth. There are two sexes and there are two genders. Okay, the idea that seems to be going around that there are only two sexes, but that there are multiple genders, folks, that's just intellectually dishonest. Okay, and I get it that people want to sort of use the narrative of like, well, people are gender fluid, or there's a sort of, something ambiguous about gender identity. Folks, let me tell you something. And this is what drives me crazy about a lot of these sort of like left-wing talking points about whether it's social engineering or, again, identity politics. Folks, there are two genders. I understand that there are some exceptions when it comes to, hermaphrodites or intersexes. I get all that stuff. And that's a small percentage of the conversation, and that's not even what I'm really referring to. But when I get sort of grief on social media or sort of in person in academia specifically, right, the idea that, well, Fernando, it doesn't really work that way. No, it does. Because again, if we want to talk about science, either believe in it completely or don't believe in it at all. But don't pick and choose when you want to believe in science, folks. And again, I'm being very consistent here. So when I brought up the example about climate change, listen, I'm staunchly of the belief that we need to be better to our planet. It's the only one we have. Okay, there isn't one laying around somewhere else in the cosmos. Okay, we need to be better to our planet. Do we need to pollute it less? Absolutely. Do we need to perhaps maybe seek other forms of renewable energy? Absolutely. But we also have to be realistic. And sometimes the rhetoric doesn't match the content. So when you want to talk to me about, well, friend, you better believe in science, otherwise you're ignorant, or you are sort of prejudiced, or you're bigoted, or whatever other adjectives seem to come out, then you need to be consistent too, folks. Okay, you want me to believe in science, and you need to believe in science too. So when I hear all of this narrative talking about genders and males and females and that there are more, no, folks, there isn't. There are two genders. Let's get with the times. And I understand it becomes a very big rallying cry for members of the LGBT community. And I'm not denouncing them because I have a lot of friends that are LGBT. So I'm not trying to pick on them or minimize them or marginalize them. I'm not. But what turns a lot of regular, everyday Americans like you and me off is when we see this insistence on social engineering, this obsession with political correctness, this fixation on identity politics. This is just another example. So really, in retrospect, and I want to be very clear, folks, if you haven't filled out your questionnaire, whether you do it via mail or you do it online, I urge you to do so. Participate in the process. It's important to really get our census down as accurately as possible for all the demographics that are mentioned there. But again, a shout out to the staff or whoever's in charge of formulating the actual census, whether it's the questions in the actual questionnaire, the tangible print one, or the online version. Again, I'm glad you passed high school biology, as did I, as did many of you. And again, I don't want to sort of go off on the tangent and say, well, Fernando's fixated on this. No, you know why I'm fixated on this, folks? Because we're trying to normalize this sort of rhetoric. We're trying to sort of make this sort of narrative acceptable and sort of make it more ingrained into our daily existence. And that's just not right. So I'm here to sort of denounce it. I'm here to sort of speak for you, regular, everyday people. Because if I'm not doing it, then who else will? And that's what I'm thinking about right now. In this week's edition of the 3-time award-winning podcast, Talk on the Hudson, I welcome back the chronicler-in-chief himself, Bruce Alston, from the Hudson County Chronicles. And of course, you can check out all the excellent journalism that he brings you via his website, www.hudsoncountychronicles.com. Now, one of the things I enjoy about having Mr. Alston on the program is he very much is a sort of very different type of journalist like myself. Now, of course, I don't write print columns, and I'm certainly not a journalist in the sort of traditional doing sort of the groundwork and sort of like the legwork that most journalists do, sort of being on the scene, reporting on site. I mean, that's not the type of journalism that I'm doing, whether it's on this program or on my weekly podcast. But I appreciate Mr. Alston for the fact that he has a really good sense of what's going on in Jersey City and, of course, overall in Hudson County politics. We talked for over 90 minutes on the recent edition of the podcast about a multiple amount of different issues. And first and foremost, we talked about Jersey City Mayor Stephen Fulop and his introduction of his council slate as he sort of is approaching re-election much earlier than expected, as he doesn't go back to the ballot until November 2021. But it certainly has not stopped the mayor of Hudson County's largest city from not only introducing his council slate, but mostly what his vision will be as he seeks a third term. Let's see what Bruce had to say about it.
Now, according to the column you mentioned, Bruce, you did mention that the mayor will be running. Well, again, he only announced 4 city council candidates. He announced 5 for Ward A, B, which include Denise Ridley, Mira Prince, Jermaine Robinson, and of course the 2 potential successors, right? The 2 at large are Council President George Waterman and Councilman Danny Rivera. I don't know, man. When I saw that list, I said, the mayor seems to be consolidating a lot of people within that ticket that have a good amount of political capital in their own wards. Were you surprised that for whatever reason Councilman Solomon was not on this list? I know that him and the mayor have not always agreed. I think Councilman Solomon should.
No, I'll tell you right now. I think him and Solomon have a very solid relationship. I think they have a very solid working relationship, right? I think that from a political standpoint, right, I think that Solomon is playing. I think Solomon's playing. I think James is really trying to be, as far as, I think he's trying to do a repeat that he did 4 years ago. I was able to get in here as a progressive, democratic, independent, right? If I can build my own, if I can get back in there the same way, I'll do it. But the only thing I would say to Councilman Solomon, he has to realize is this, though, is that now you're running with the track record. I mean, he raised almost like $200,000 last time. But you have to remember something, though. He did get into a runoff, right?
Yes.
There's arguments if certain people weren't in that race that Rebecca Symes she'd have been all right. He would never even got elected. He beat her in the runoff, right? He beat her in the runoff, you know. And what I would say to him is, if you have a chance to run with the incumbent, it would seem that you would do it, right? But I don't know what his big picture is, as far as, is it that he's trying to build his own brand, his own base? He doesn't want to consolidate it with the mayor. And then also you have to understand this, though. I would think a young man like Councilman Solomon, is that he might have mayoral aspirations himself, right? Well, the mayor's going to run other people on that ticket that have been with him longer, like Council President Waterman and Councilman at Large Dan Rivera, that also I'm pretty sure are going to have some type of maybe a higher office. So do you run with that ticket knowing later on that if you run with the mayor that he can't transactionally say to you, well, I'm going to support you in 4 years to be mayor or whenever I leave? So I believe there's maybe some jockey behind the scenes that one might want a commitment from the other, and the other one's not willing to give that commitment, you know. And whereas a guy like Solomon, he can say, you know what, I can raise my own money. I think that I can win offline again. And the only thing I say to him is this: if I'm Solomon, if I'm Joyce Waterman, and if I'm Danny Rivera, right? Oh, I don't want him to run on our ticket. I want to get a guy in there, let's say like maybe a municipal prosecutor like Kay Cudnett. Maybe I want to get someone like a Brian Platt, who's the VA. Maybe I want to pull a candidate down there to take this guy out now. So he's not a problem, maybe, let's say, in 2025.
Without a doubt, a lot's on the minds of Jersey City residents, of course, not just only with what Mayor Stephen Fulop is doing, but, of course, what direction his ticket will take, and, of course, what challengers might await Stephen Fulop as, again, he seeks a third term in November of 2021. And of course, Bruce Alston has a tremendous sense of what's going on in the community, not just only with the current council slate, but perhaps with also other potential candidates for council and ultimately maybe some opponents for the mayor as he again seeks a third term in Jersey City. Later on in the show, obviously another highlight for your attention, we talked about the current state of the Democratic Party. Now, recently, with the defeats in the states of Florida, for example, and Illinois, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders faces a very steep climb to try to win the Democratic primary nomination from Joe Biden, who, believe it or not, folks, at the beginning of the year looked dead in the water. in public opinion polls and, of course, in fundraising. And to no one's surprise, he won South Carolina. And from that point on, the former vice president has been on a roll, sort of sweeping every single state in the primary process. We talked a little bit about what awaits the Democratic Party and whether or not Joe Biden is indeed the candidate to defeat the president coming up in November later this year. Now, of course, folks, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we're living during sort of a very volatile time with the coronavirus pandemic and the impact it's having not just on our communities, on the impact it's having on our economy, but also what the impact it's having on our sort of political season. Obviously, people are becoming very nervous about going to go vote in primaries. Many states that had primaries scheduled for the month of March and April have rescheduled them for later on in June. And of course, folks, this could sort of really push the envelope for what's going on later on in the convention, which still is scheduled to take place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in July for the Democratic National Committee. Of course, Mr. Alston had a lot to say about what faces Joe Biden during this election season and whether or not he'll be ultimately the best opponent for President Donald Trump.
I think yesterday's losses are piling up for Bernie. I think that, the delegate count, I think the math is slipping away from Bernie Sanders without question. But Bruce, we've talked about this before on this program, and I'll say it again. It just, and I had Chairwoman DeGee's on. Actually, I'm going to have her on next week. Democrats are in a really tough spot here, Bruce, because Joe Biden is not very inspiring. I'm sorry. And it's not because I'm someone that's a center-right guy and, I kind of lean a little more conservative. Again, if you were telling me that he's a Democrat that's going to resonate, like he'll resonate here in New Jersey and California.
I'll tell you where I think he's going to walk back, okay? He's committed to where he would have a woman running mate, right?
Yeah,
I think he's going to walk back on that. I think if you want, this is people can get upset, and I wasn't on presidential thing, right? But I think if you want someone who can add juice to this ticket and it can bring a rock star attitude, you might have to pick Cory Booker. Cory's got to be.
You think so?
You know why? Cory's that moderate. He's the one that can get the moderate Republicans. He can be a centrist. Cory can be progressive as all he wants, but Cory is very centrist. He can shout the progressive label, but I think Cory might be. There's no one out there that can really add that juice.
Bruce, you don't
can
think
really
someone,
add it. Think about it,
Bruce. Now again, I don't like her whatsoever. But do you think that someone like Kamala Harris could be worthwhile for Joe Biden, or do you think that there's too much baggage with Kamala to even be remotely, an appealing candidate as a running mate?
I think what it is, I'll be honest with you. I like Kamala, I do, but it's going to come down to can she be that charismatic? And it's going to matter. Charisma is going to matter in this election.
Without a doubt, it was a very informative and illuminating episode with Bruce Alston, again, the chronicler-in-chief and the head of the Hudson County Chronicles. You can listen to the episode in its entirety by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talk on the Hudson. You can listen to the episode and download it from any PC, Mac, smartphone, or tablet. I always welcome your comments, folks, and your feedback about what you like about the podcast, what you don't, and everything else in between. Once again, as the podcast celebrates its third year on the air, I can't say enough about you, my loyal listening audience, who tune in every Wednesday night, live at 9 p.m. via Blog Talk Radio. And, of course, you're very sort of dedicated and devoted to the podcast. And, of course, I'll continue to work hard for all of you to bring you the insightful guests and really the people that everyone's talking about right now in Hudson County's political climate. Again, notwithstanding the coronavirus pandemic, there's still a lot to talk about when it comes to politics, the quality of life, and of course, community issues that matter to Hudson County residents. Recent guests have included, of course, the Dean of Hudson County Journalism, Al Sullivan, and an Insider NJ columnist, of course, HEDO Chairwoman Amy DeGees, and many more. So, of course, these are the wonderful guests I'll continue to bring you for the rest of 2020. And again, you can always listen to it live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time by going once again to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talk Talk on the Hudson. Now, here are some local stories for your attention. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, the coronavirus has gotten a lot of residents into a panic, and certainly it has forced elected officials, not just at the state level, such as Governor Murphy and Attorney General Gabriel Gawal, to take some drastic actions in terms of what to do with not only reporting on issues and cases, but also what is to be done in municipalities. And of course, here in Hudson County, we've seen mayors all across Hudson County collectively take some preventive measures. For example, implementing curfews, making sure certain businesses are being closed down, providing resources still to the elderly and to our children. But one of the things that I think is really important is sort of the decision, and this was reported recently in the Jersey Journal, and a shout out to Michael Dempsey and the good work that he does at the Jersey Journal. But it was announced that Newport Center Mall and the Hudson Mall in Jersey City will be closed as Jersey City attempts to sort of curtail the spread of the coronavirus. Now, Mayor Stephen Fulop provided this update via Facebook Live earlier this week. Now, managers at stores at both Newport and Hudson Mall who spoke to the Jersey Journal recently on the condition of anonymity said that there is noticeably less foot traffic throughout the malls, and they spoke with the Journal prior to Mayor Fulop's announcement. And one of the things was sort of the reality, folks, that our malls are indeed empty, not just in Hudson County, but clearly throughout the state. And one of the few shoppers that was actually even available in the mall before Mayor Fulop's announcement was indeed wearing a mask and visor, certainly covering his face as he was walking through the mall. So this is becoming more of a standard for many residents, certainly as they were visiting malls before this directive was handed down by Mayor Stephen Fulop. And folks, listen, let me just be very clear also about what's going on right now. And I certainly don't want to add to any panic. And I think it's important to sort of remain calm during these very volatile times. But one of the things I would argue that has been increasingly beneficial to our communities has been the curfews implemented by the local mayors. Here in North Hudson, Mayors Nicholas Sacco in North Bergen, Mayor Brian Stack in Union City, Mayor Gabriel Rodriguez in West New York, and Mayor Wayne Zitt in Guttenberg have all implemented a curfew within the municipalities. We know that Hoboken Mayor Ravi Bala and Bayonne Mayor Jimmy Davis have also taken very preventive measures to make sure that, quite frankly, people are trying to stay in their homes and trying to sort of reduce the possibilities of transmission. Because, folks, again, our kids and our elderly population are the most vulnerable during this pandemic. So I really urge you, as I said, obviously malls are closed, many businesses are being closed. Okay, obviously there are still essentials that need to be bought, whether it be at the supermarket or everything else, and people need to be outside. But folks, if you can stay indoors, please do that. The less people on the street, the better. Again, we don't know really the extent of how transmission is taking place. We're seeing cases being reported on a daily basis. And these numbers are spiking, folks, and it's alarming. But it's also important to remain calm during these times. So again, whether it's, shout out and kudos to Mayor Stephen Fulop with this directive to shut down malls. And of course, other local businesses are following suit. And I'm hoping at some point, listen, I don't have all the answers. Otherwise, I'd be governor myself. But here's a shout out to Governor Phil Murphy, who's doing a really, really good job in helping keep us calm in working with all the municipalities and all, obviously, law enforcement officials and other clinicians and medical experts to try to reduce the proximity and the propensity of what this virus could represent to us. Now, am I calling for an outright lockdown of the state? I don't know if that's something I would want to recommend, and maybe even for a lot of residents, it may be a last resort. We're seeing that policy measure being explored in other states around the country. I don't know if New Jersey will follow suit, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on in these weeks and probably months ahead as the coronavirus continues to consume our news feeds and, quite frankly, it seems to be consuming our daily thoughts. Now to other news that really doesn't involve the corona pandemic. And of course, folks, this week, for you Democratic voters, and of course for Bernie supporters, it was a very sort of lackluster week in terms of poll results and what's going on in the primaries. Former Vice President Joe Biden once again swept Super Tuesday number 2, and he is adding to his delegate count as this primary season is progressing. Now, without a doubt, both candidates represent very different visions for the Democratic Party, and as we saw in the recent debate this past Sunday via CNN and Univision, both candidates had a lot to say about what they'd like to do as president, and certainly how they prefer to address not only the ongoing corona pandemic, but other policies that are really they'd like to see implemented should they win the presidency coming up this November 3rd. But even before that, folks, this is sort of a moment of pause, I think, for the Bernie Sanders campaign as, listen, let's be very fair, he might have to sort of reassess where he stands right now. Now, again, with some primaries being delayed until either May or June, it'd be very interesting to see what the senator from Vermont will be doing when it comes to his campaign. He's still raising money, and he has a very devoted fan base, not only just online, but also in people mobilizing. But folks, right now, during this pandemic, it's going to be hard for people to sort of go knocking on doors. It's going to be hard to hold rallies. It's going to be hard to hold any sort of town halls because of what's going on currently with the coronavirus. So if anything, it's done a real disservice to Bernie Sanders. It's also done a disservice to the former vice president, who I'm sure also wants to hold rallies. And it's also done an immense disservice to the president of the United States, who has been touring the country in very sort of strategic appearances in certain states, specifically battleground states. And during this election season, I think we can all agree that not just the president, but his eventual opponent, whoever that may be, I'm sure wants to be out on the campaign trail, but it's just not possible right now. But currently right now, as we see sort of, what's going on with the delegate count, Bernie Sanders has a lot to think about. And while the former vice president can't get too cocky and overconfident about his delegate lead, a lot can change in the next few weeks and months, leading up to the convention coming up in Milwaukee later on, which is still scheduled for late July. And of course, we know that the Republican convention, which is still scheduled for late August in Charlotte, North Carolina, also might be up in the air. But without a doubt, there'll be a lot to talk about, again, in the coming weeks and months ahead about where the Democratic Party is heading. Are they heading towards a more moderate candidate like Joe Biden, who is still somewhat center-left, or do Democrats prefer ultimately a far more progressive candidate to the left? Again, but what we're seeing with primary results, it's abundantly clear to Democratic voters that they'd rather go with the safe bet, and that seems to be the former vice president, Joe Biden. Now, whether or not the former vice president can hold his own in debates against the current president remains to be seen, because that doesn't happen until later in October. And hopefully by then, a lot of what's going on in terms of volatility in the markets, what the effect of this pandemic is doing to our public health, and ultimately the impact it's having on our economy still remains to be seen. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on for, especially during this election cycle. And that's our show for this week. To check out all the excellent programming offered to you by the Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air, please go to their websites, www.hmgtvshows.com, www.livestream.com/HMGTV, and www.njonair.com. Don't forget to like the Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air on Facebook, and follow them both on Instagram and Twitter. And also, don't forget to check out the 3-time award-winning podcast, Talking the Hudson, which airs live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at www.blogtalkradio.com/Talking the Hudson. Even during self-quarantine, folks, hopefully you'll have a chance to listen to not only the recent episode with the Chronicler-in-Chief himself from the Hudson County Chronicles, Bruce Alston, but all of my previous guests throughout 2020, and of course, going back to 2019. All the episodes have been very educational, informative, and illuminating, and hopefully you'll agree once you check them all out. Folks, don't forget to check me out also on Twitter at Professor F. Uribe. Don't forget to check out the show also on Instagram at Talking Politics with Fernando Uribe, the podcast at Talking the Hudson. Of course, check me out also on Instagram at Professor Fernando Uribe. I appreciate all the likes and all the new follows, and of course, I hope you enjoy all my Instagram stories, which incorporate a lot of sort of pop culture, pro wrestling, sports, politics, and much more. Again, folks, as we're sort of quarantined inside, hopefully let's take a moment and let's look after each other. Let's enjoy ourselves. Let's spend time with family. Let's look after our children and our elderly population, who again are the most vulnerable during this pandemic. Wash your hands, practice responsible social distancing, and of course, folks, let's just stay safe during these very volatile times. And that's our show again for this week. And never forget, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, you know it's Talking Politics with Fernando Uribe right here with the Hudson Media Group.
Don't forget to catch Fernando's podcast at blogtalkradio.com/talkonthehudson. New episodes available every Wednesday night at 9 p.m.